social support in a variety of ways. Hi, Lisa. Brilliant. So again, I suppose each of the presenters is really speaking to an area around domestic abuse and gender-based violence that I feel is really, really important. I also would have had experience volunteering with the Limerick Rape Crisis Centre for 2 years. And again, that language of the bystander really coming in as well, which we're going to be hearing from in relation to our second speaker as well. So it's really great to see so many people here and to see so many people interested in learning about this. And what I really like about all three of the speakers here is, that they've all engaged in really proactive initiatives that are making a difference for real people in the real sense. So our first speaker is going to be you okay? Someone unmuted.
And also it think in me
and somebody is maybe unmuted there.
My point of view, it's making
sense. Here we go. Okay, so just the structure of the session. So we have an hour, we have until 11:30. So we're just 1 or 2 minutes behind time. So I'm going to shut up now in another minute. And each speaker, we have 3 here, will have 15 minutes to do their presentation. And at the end, we'll have kind of 10 or 15 minutes for questions for the floor as well. So as Lisa said at the start, if questions can go into the chat, that would be great. If there is a way you can unmute yourself and you're okay with being heard or being seen in the recording, you're more than welcome to share or to speak, and ask question directly. That's no problem at all. But I'm not sure that function is enabled. So feel free to try it out. And otherwise, just please do put your questions in the chat. We might try and make sure that there's at least one question answered and addressed for each of our presenters as well. So we just be conscious of that. So we may prioritize that if there's a lot of questions, that we're ensuring that each person has had at least one opportunity. So our first speaker is Hazel Larkin from DCU, who's going to be speaking to us about the Lilac program, which is a program developed for parents who have experienced sexual abuse as children for themselves. So it looks like to be a very innovative program, from what I can understand, one of the first of its kind. So I might hand you over to her for now to start that presentation. Is that okay with you, Hazel?
That's absolutely perfect. Thanks a million, Lisa. And I promise not to go over time, because I know that everybody's time is very valuable. And it's a Friday morning, so I'm grateful that so many people have actually turned up to the conference. I know it's an exciting event, for those of us who live in this space. And it's a wonderful opportunity to network. And I just wish that we were in person, but maybe next time. So I am going to share my screen. Screen share. There we go. So yeah, there we are. There we are. There's the Lilac program, and as we've said, it's a program for parents who are sexually abused as children. It is a 12-week program. And it is, as Emma was saying, it is the only one of its kind on these islands, and as far as I'm aware, the only one of its kind actually in Europe. So the model for the Lilac program is one that I have devised and created myself. Of course, I'm drawing on work that has been done by other people in this sphere, like particularly Judith Herman and her work around recovery from child sexual abuse in particular. So the name of the program, the Lilac program, is because lilac is a flower that symbolizes transformation and growth, but also the purity of childhood, which those of us who have histories of child sexual abuse do very much feel that our kind of the purity of our childhood and our innocence has somehow got a thumbprint of abuse stamped onto it. I hear that a lot from people. It feels like the inky fingerprints of the abuser are all over us. So I just thought something that would reflect the innocence and the purity that that we still have, actually, that we can uncover for ourselves and support each other to uncover, that it's still there. So it also reminds me, to be very personal about it, of a beautiful white lilac tree that grew outside the house of horrors that I grew up in. And it's one of the few things that brought me joy in my childhood, was this beautiful tree that flowered around about this time of the year. And actually to this day, the fragrance of white lilac reminds me of that tree and of the arrival of summer and sunshine and all the things that an Irish summer promised, but seldom delivered on. So there we are. It's why this? Well, it's in the course of my research and in talking to parents with histories of child sexual abuse in general, I became aware of the need for parents with histories of child sexual abuse for a course that would address the specific needs of this group. I should say that I have put my references on slides at the end rather than sprinkle them throughout, because I'm just so aware that 15 minutes is enough time if you're concise. So they're coming later. But I would have also spoken to the RCNI and the Dublin Rape Crisis Centre around parenting programs, kind of hoping that they had something that I just had missed, and that I wouldn't have to go and do it myself. But they made the point that parenthood or impending parenthood are often triggers for people who are sexually abused as children, that it can oftentimes be the thing that, or the event that triggers memories for people. Sometimes you'll meet parents who had no idea until their own child was born, or until the child reached the age that they were at when they were abused. And that's when actually the memories come back to them. So it can be obviously a very difficult and confronting time for people. And then with the added stress of having a newborn or a young child, obviously there is a need for that support. So why now? Well, because there's nothing available, or there was nothing available until 2020 in Europe to address the needs of parents who were sexually abused as children. And it is a need that must be addressed, because there is an added layer to parenting for those of us who were sexually abused as children. Which brings us to the why me, because obviously I've been saying us, so clearly I've outed myself as a member of the group. I am an autoethnographer, so that's not news. It's not a new thing for me to do. But I must stress that I have degrees in psychology and sociology, but I am not a therapist. But there is therapeutic value in the work that I do. So as I said, I have a history of child sexual abuse. I am a parent. My children tell me they're 18 and 20, but I'm convinced they're really only 6 and 8, because that would make me older than I'd care to admit to. So as I said, I have degrees in psychology, sociology, sexuality studies, and law, whereas my PhD research, which I'm hoping to defend in my Viva later this summer, focuses on the relationships between daughters and mothers in Ireland, where both have histories of child sexual abuse. I am a trained trainer. I am a trained and experienced theatre maker, so that all comes into presenting and devising and helping people feel safe and creating a safe space, which can be more of a challenge on Zoom, which I'll talk about later on. I also am a doula. I was actually, I believe, the first practicing doula in Ireland back in 2005, but because the doulas are now, people know what they are. It doesn't need to be explained so much anymore that, we're non-medical birth partners. So I used to explain it to legal people. It's like a Mackenzie friend, but for birth. So I now exclusively work with parents who were sexually abused, with expectant parents who have histories of child sexual abuse. And I also train midwives, doctors, dentists, and other healthcare providers around caring for people who have histories of child sexual abuse. So I know this subject fairly well, even if I wish on some days that I really didn't. So my participants are parents and parents to be. So the upper limit, and this is what perhaps is unusual about this model. Everybody here who has devised workshops will have read, will have been informed, will have been trained that 14 is a good number, because there's, you know, it's not too many. It's not an unwieldy group, but there's enough that there's that you're providing the program for as many people as possible at one go, and that there is a good dynamic, and, you know, lots of voices in the room. There is no way that would work. That amount of people would work with this program. So it's limited to 8 per group, because that really just seemed to be the optimal number. I've tried 10. I tried I tried 10. I tried 12, and I tried 8, and 8 just seemed to be the number that I came back to, because it was the one that worked best. Because, pardon me, for many participants, this is the first time that they have had a chance to say what they need to say, to be heard in a non-judgmental space, and to have the time and the space to speak individually, but then to benefit from the group, from the peer support, because I'm a big fan of peer supported learning, and actually just of peer support, of talking to somebody and for them to say, oh, I know how that feels. And you know they know how it feels, because they're part of that gang that you don't want to be part of, but that you are. So I just found that 8 was the best number, because we were limited to 2 hours to 2-hour meetings every week. And the reason for the limit of 2 hours, because people would say, oh, we could go and talk forever. But anybody who's ever been part of a group knows that 2 hours of full concentration is a long time. And also it's a long time to be steeped in tales of abuse, no matter how much therapy you've had, and I include myself in that. You know, it is a long time, and also to ask people to give up, because it's 12 hours. It's 12 weeks. So to ask people to commit to more than 2 hours a week just felt like a big ask as well. Of course, there are possibilities to do weekend workshops. They haven't happened yet, because obviously we're all living through COVID and trying our best to figure out how to come back into real world participation, and that just hasn't happened yet for a variety of reasons, not least because I was writing up. So the participants then are also self-selecting, and by that I mean that I did toy with the idea of having a questionnaire for people to fill in to decide, you know, to decide between us whether or not this was a good fit for them. But I scrapped that, and I'm glad I did. I had a consultation with the Clean and Isadlia of the Rape Crisis Network, and we decided that it was possibly best to kind of scrap that when people, you know, were part of the group, it would become apparent fairly quickly, or even in talking to people before they joined, rather, it would become apparent fairly quickly whether or not this was a good fit for them, where they were at the time, and also considering who would be in the rest of the group. So what has also happened is that participants, every single person who has, and I should say I've run this program 4 times, and every single person who has participated has had therapy. And most participants were in therapy themselves. And I must also add that I also have because of course, not being a therapist, there's no professional or obligation on me to have a supervisor, but ethically and morally, and for my own good mental health, I feel that there is a need. So I have a therapist who operates in kind of the role of a supervisor, as it were, and I see her after every meeting, and that is hugely helpful. And then she goes obviously and sees her supervisor. So upon registration, the participants are sent the confidentiality agreement, which is a living document, and it changes, or it is open to change from group to group, for people to add in what they feel is necessary or what they feel is lacking, but that they would like included in the confidentiality agreement. Alterations are welcomed, they're encouraged, only until the end of the first week of the program, because after that, you know, you need to have an agreement that everybody has signed up to, and we can't be changing it every week. So it is sent to people beforehand. They have an opportunity to make changes, and then by the end of the first week, it's not set in stone, but it's pretty much where we're at, and what we've agreed to. Now, what's also interesting, or what's
apologies, Hazel, just to say you've just 2-3 minutes max left. Is that okay?
Grand, okay, I will keep going. No. This is kind of the meat and potatoes of it. What makes this particular piece different? But Emma, thank you so much for letting me know. I hadn't realised I was rambling. So what also makes this different is that the midway between meetings, participants are emailed to check in with them and see how they are emotionally after the meeting. So we have the meeting, then you're emailed afterwards to with worksheets, because I am a teacher, there has to be homework, and that support work based on the topic that has been discussed at the meeting. So every meeting for the 12 weeks has a theme, has a topic. For example, the impact of trauma, the trauma cycle, safety, self-care and their importance in parenting, trust, remembering, shame, guilt, anger, grief, and the final one then is moving on. Where do we go from here? So there is, as I said, there's communication between the meetings. The midweek email also offers people a chance to reflect on how they're getting on with the support work. Sometimes it's too confrontational and they find they're not doing it, and we can kind of have a discussion around why it might be that they're avoiding it, and they can unpack that for themselves. And it also offers an avenue for contact if people feel they need to avail of it. And then the day before the next meeting, the agenda for that meeting is sent out. Again, so there are no surprises. Everybody knows what's coming up, what's going to be expected of them. They get to see the worksheets before we have the meeting. And then what's also unusual or different about this program is that upon completion of the program, participants can avail of ongoing peer support. So they're provided with a link to a private secret Facebook group, which they're free to join. I'm the admin, I'm the moderator, I'm the gatekeeper, and I visit at least once a day to take part in discussion, post thoughts, encouragement, all that sort of thing. But they're also provided with a link to a Zoom meeting which takes place, pardon me, on the final Sunday of every month at 6:30 p.m. for up to 3 hours. But these meetings are not agenda led, and people are free to come and go as they please and welcome to discuss anything that's on their mind. So we have, just to say, forget that, what has worked, in-person, online or hybrid? All three have worked. In-person works best. I was concerned that online on Zoom would lose something, but that also seemed to work. Hybrid was the model that worked least well when we had people in person and on Zoom at the very beginning of COVID, when there were kind of mixed messages around what we were and weren't allowed to do. We've had groups that were all male, all female and mixed. Mixed works well for the men, not so great for the women. Women prefer a female only group. So that is what I've done since the second group. It's been either all female or all male. And then the peer-led monthly meetings afterwards work really well, but they need a leader. And at the moment, that person is me, because as we say, we only have 4 groups, but going forward, that is unsustainable. And I can talk about that later. This is what I've had to say, but this is what my participants are saying, that it works. Because of course the proof of the pudding is in the eating. What do the people who've done the course, thanks Emma, what do they have to say about whether or not it's been any use? So this was by the 3rd and 4th iterations were assessed by an external kind of auditor. And these then are my references. Again, anybody who's interested, I can send them on and send on my slides if that's of interest. And then I think I'm done.
Well done.
Thank you so much. Horse race through the end of it. No, you're brilliant at keeping us on topic. Let me stop sharing. I'm sure we could have whole days conversations and workshops about each and any of these. There's so many questions for me popping straight away, but yeah, just in the interest of making sure we get through the task. Of course, yes, absolutely. Yeah. I don't want to hog the time. And not at all, no. And we started a couple of minutes late too, so you're perfect. Thanks, Hazel, for that. Really interesting, engaging. So our next presenter is Celine Griffin from UCC, who's going to speak to us about the Bystander Intervention Programme that she runs and
rolled out in UCC or with third level students as a whole. It's also to note as well that Celine has her own business called Sexuality Insights, and I'm not sure if she's going to have a chance to speak about that today, but she may speak about some of her work with secondary schools and in other kind of forums around sexual health and awareness as well. So Celine, are you ready to rock?
Yeah, I'm ready to go. I'll share screen there, Emma. Thank you.
Excellent, no bother.
So hi, everyone. Thanks for being here this morning. And Hazel, thank you for your fantastic presentation. I've heard you a few times, so it's great to hear you again. And I'm in great company with Mary-Louise following afterwards. So this morning, I'm going to talk about the UCC Bystander Intervention Programme. It's a sexual and relationship violence prevention programme which was adopted from the work of the intervention initiative in the UK by Dr. Fenton. So the director of the UCC Bystander Programme is Professor Louise Crowley, and she has done a huge amount of work in developing the programme over the last few years. So I have been there since January, and we are currently, as we know, there's so much research in this area of relationship violence and sexual violence, and it's changing very quickly. So, we're currently updating the program now again. So it's, it's constantly a work in progress. So this program is available to all staff and students in UCC. Once UCC staff and students complete it, they can receive a digital badge, which is like a micro-credential of having completed the program. But also the program is available externally to HEIs and various different external public and private sector companies are looking for access to it now. So the program has 4 central aims. The first one is to, introduce students and staff to the concept of, an active bystander. And this brings to mind, that Desmond Tutu quote, we have to stop pulling people, out of the river. We need to go upriver and find where they're going in. And that's where the active bystander comes into play, is because, we all witness situations, and it's just being able to identify that we can have an influence on the outcome of that situation. We can prevent harm from happening early on once we have, the skills to do so. Another aim is to educate all participants to understand the key issues of consent, your boundaries surrounding sexual assault, rape and abusive relationships. And this is done very creatively throughout the program through different videos. There's a Padlet where all participants put in their their views and experiences, what they see on an everyday basis. There are quizzes and videos. And it's explored through a series of online, 4 or 5 online modules. And then there's a facilitated workshop where, the participants come in and we discuss the content of the program. We also discuss, bystander skills, different skills, because everyone will have different types of skills to intervene. And then, also it's a really rich place because there's a lot of peer learning that goes on there as well. The empowering and upskilling students and staff to safely intervene and demand a safer campus and society. And it's to know that, everyone has the capacity to make a change, to take small steps or to make, to stand up and say something. And the thing about the bystander is we need to change our perception that a bystander is someone who comes in, all powerful, and it's not about confrontation. The bystander, the active bystander, is about having these skills to be able to manage an intervention very safely and without confrontation, and to be able to, educate others, that their behavior is harmful in a safe way. And finally, then, the aim ultimately is to develop an institutional culture in UCC which stands up against unacceptable behaviour and abuse, and that everyone present, in the UCC community is part of this institutional culture and has the capacity to make the change. So we really want people to feel responsible for being part of the change, to know that they are part of the solution, to know that they can speak out, and that if they don't speak out, that they're actually part of the problem, that that we're normalizing it by not addressing it. you know, the people who are hurt by sexual violence and intimate partner violence, they're around us, and, you know, they're people we care about, and we want to be able to, you know, stand up and, you know, not allow that shame and blame that's associated with sexual violence and relationship violence, and to stand by people and, you know, be able to support them when they need it. Besides that, then, you know, all students and all staff deserve a safe and enjoyable, you know, third level experience and workplace environment. And we want to demand a zero tolerance approach to all forms of sexual harassment and violence. So again, back to the programme, these are just some of the things that are covered in the programme. It's more extensive than this, but, you know, it goes through online harassment, stalking, image-based sex abuse, you know, sending of images, harassment, catcalling, unwanted advances, groping, sexual assault, rape, relationship violence, gaslighting, love bombing. It's information on all of this. And actually what we find is, and I'll talk to this in a minute about their experiences, is that sometimes, you know, once people go through the program and then it comes to the facilitated workshop, you know, we will hear things like, actually, I didn't know that what I was going through was gaslighting. You know, I knew it was wrong. I just didn't know. I didn't have a word to put on it. So it's hugely valuable, the content in it, to be able to identify behaviors, knowing, to be able to recognize them as unacceptable, and then to be able to do something about it. So there are 4 stages to bystander intervention. The first is, you know, we have to notice the event or the situation, to be aware that, you know, it's happening around you. Then to interpret it as problematic. So not to underestimate what's happening or to miss it entirely. It's to be able to know the impact of what is happening. If you hear a comment, if you hear a sexist comment or a homophobic comment or something like that, is to know that, you know, that might not impact you, but that could certainly be very harmful for someone else. To recognize that as a problem for, you know, society. It's not pro-social behavior. Then it's feeling responsible for dealing with it. And again, so even though you're not directly involved with something, it's to know that you have the capacity to change that situation. Even though you're not part of the problem, you know, that you are part of the solution. And finally, to possess the necessary skills to act then. And this is all teased out. But the necessary skills are, you know, to, you know, always remembering, again, the golden rule: never intervene unless it's safe to do so. But that there's almost always another form of intervention. You know, then you call 999, or you know, you engage someone who might be in a position of power, maybe a bouncer at a nightclub or someone like that, if you don't have the skills yourself. Just make sure that you're safe yourself. So what's really important to address are these reasons for non-intervention, because I think, you know, if we're all to reflect on why or why not we might not intervene in a situation, there are various different reasons, and these are, you know, some of them. So social influence or identity is the sense that no one else is doing anything, so I shouldn't either, you know, or, you know, I don't feel any connection, or I don't identify with, you know, the victim of this unwanted attention, or so, you know, I feel like I'm not going to get involved. The audience inhibition is if you intervene, like, what's going to happen? Is who's watching? I'm afraid to, you know, I'm going to be embarrassed, or what's going to happen if I intervene. I just, you know, I'm fearful of other people watching me and what might happen. The diffusion of responsibility is, you know, assuming that someone else will do it. You know, we can all be, you know, having a great night out, or, you know, be on the train and work and, you know, hear something and you're like, oh, you know, someone else is going to take care of this. But actually, no, we have to take that responsibility ourselves to actually take action, you know, when we can. Fear of retaliation then is another reason for not intervening. And that would be, you know, where you're afraid of physical harm, you know, even social isolation. So if you're, you know, in a group of friends and you call it out, then there's, you know, fear that, you know, you'd be isolated from your group of friends. So what we're looking at is where we are, that most people behave, you know, with healthy and positive behavior, and then there's a minority who behave unacceptably socially. And what we need to do is just identify this problematic behavior, and to know that actually most of us are in the majority, and we we recognize harmful behavior, but from the perspective of the, minority who perpetrate this, if they're not called out, then they feel that their behavior that their unacceptable behavior is actually acceptable. So we need to call it out. And what we're looking at is getting to a new normal where unacceptable behavior is called out so frequently that it actually changes the culture. So getting to the research bit, so we do pre and post questionnaires, and these, questions on social norms. So for example, this one, to criticize a friend who says they had sex with someone who was passed out or didn't give consent, you can see when it comes to, participants themselves, 87% said it's extremely likely that they would call out that behavior. However, they perceive that their peers won't be as aggrieved as they are about it. So this is really interesting. And again, another question here, approach a friend if they thought they were in an abusive relationship to let them know that they were there to help. Again, this perception that while you feel that this is unacceptable behavior and that you would call it out, there is the feeling that, your peers would not. So part of the bystander program is really, making people realize that they are actually in the majority, and that by stepping up and speaking out, what you're doing is you're making everyone, you're changing the culture and you're encouraging others to stand with you.
So just 2 more minutes, Celine. Just
okay, thanks.
Better.
Brilliant. So when it comes to, feedback, again, the effect of the program here, it shows that, there's little I can do about sexual harassment at my institution. It changes from pre-workshop to post-workshop. You can see there's a significant jump there, about 30%. If they were asked, I have a good understanding of what constitutes sexual violence and harassment. You can see pre-workshop goes from 69%, post-workshop, almost everyone said that they now have a good understanding of what constitutes sexual harassment and violence. And again, here they have a good ability to intervene in a threatening or dangerous situation. You can see again a significant jump from pre-workshop to post-workshop. And just a few quotes here before we go. When asked if they'd had the opportunity to intervene, since doing the bystander program, these are some quotations from the questionnaires. It said, I was actually coming back home from my shift when I saw a woman sitting in the curb, and I felt it was dangerous to leave her unattended. So I asked her whether everything was fine. Her phone was out of charge. I was able to help her by lending my phone for the call. I was able to both identify her need for help as well as successfully provide her with one. Another one, someone I knew was catcalling a girl down the street, so I criticized him and tried to get him to see it from the girl's point of view. Those are actually 2 male participants who made those statements, and these are 2 female participants. I was out on a Wednesday night after the clubs reopened and bought a really drunk girl a bottle of water and ensured she had a safe way home. And another one, I expressed discomfort and disgust at an older man's comment on a younger woman's appearance, whereas the other people around me found it funny. So, the essence of the bystander program is, awareness that you can call out this behavior and you can actually have this ripple effect and make a change. So just before I finish, I just want to mention that bystander is available at 3rd level, but we're currently running a pilot program for 2nd level. Initially, there were 7 schools who signed up for the pilot, but now there are 45 schools running in the pilot program. So thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Celine. And really, even just that there's 45 schools signing up for the pilot speaks to the, the value of this program. And again, I really like how concrete it is and really kind of clear steps for people and clear information. So thank you for that.
Emma.
Brilliant. So, okay. So, and remember as well, people, you can be putting in your questions into the comments as we go along. If, in case they go away from you again or anything, don't worry about that and we'll pick them up at the end. So our last speaker is Mary-Louise Lynch, who is coming from Survivors Informing Services and Institutions. I do believe is Lisa Rourke-Scott perhaps involved in this also, and maybe speaking to us today too. So I'm really looking forward to kind of hearing about some of the work they've done about people who have experienced abuse, informing what research is going to be done or has been done moving forward. So I will hand that over to you, Mary-Louise, if that's okay.
Thanks, Emma. I will attempt to share my screen and go into presenter mode, which I'm not used to. Can you just see my slides, or can you see all my notes?
You can see your notes at the moment.
Okay. All right. Let me just, sorry, stop
Okay.
that for a minute. Do you have the link for it?
I'm not sure I have the link for a year when I do. I had the link for the other two. Let me just check.
I did
Okay, let me just
send it to Katerina. Sorry about this.
Oh, you're okay. Oh, I do. Wait, here we go. Perfect. I can share that. Mhm. Now, is that right?
That's it.
Great. So just let me know when to hit forward and I can do that for you.
Great. Okay. So thank you. And thanks to Lisa for her patience and her guidance. It has been a privilege to learn. I'm not a natural academic at all. And thanks to the other participants. So SiSi is a relatively new organization of survivors of intimate partner violence, and we consider ourselves to be experts by our collective experience. Our participation in research, we believe, is essential to improve outcomes for survivor families. And you can go on to the next one.
Yeah.
Okay. So why now? Patterns, methods, and channeling of domestic, sexual, and gender-based violence are revealed across the globe in milliseconds via digital technology. Stories are shared every day, but really all this does is heighten awareness of the problems. Translating survivor experiences into a credible evidence base to provide transformative solutions requires collaborative action because bringing the private sphere into public view has been a cultural taboo. Now, with so much else revealed, engaged research with survivors is the tipping point to flooding previously sealed chambers, operating in silos, and some of them seemingly frozen in time and attitude. Through the use of trusted practice methods in research, women might at last be safe to tell their truths to effect change in the most intimate of spaces, their daily lives. So next, this is breaking the rules, and breaking the rules means reaching into spaces where women are trapped. Helping each other to speak washes away shame, believing the terrifying stories that we are told, and listening to her insight, and then acting to make the next woman's leave to freedom a shorter journey. Making her children's world a wholesome place to grow up, watched over with care by the community. Next. So women sharing their stories validates experience. It also touches the heart of populations and has the power to transform the individual and the community through a powerful connection. It's one way of exposing what is really going on. Women who have suffered in this way are also ordinary people, and by their stories coming out, it is safer for other ordinary people to see that this could happen to anyone. And if it could happen to anyone, then we as a society need to change things. The more people are convinced of the urgency to change things, the more momentum there will be to drive change forward. And that just is drawing on, you know, the grassroots model and linking that closely with research, you know, just to connect that space for action.
Next.
So yeah, next, sorry. So being the difference, I'm just clicking away here. Trauma makes fitting in and accepting solutions created by others for us a tight squeeze. Often outside of the one-to-one therapeutic setting, taking part can be daunting, and yet freedom from isolation is a primary goal of recovering from abuse. Everybody knows that survivors already inhabit professional spaces where activism happens, but naming that can still be a risk. The current model to address domestic sexual and gender-based violence works to play catch-up with ever-increasing rates of perpetration. Truly effective intervention strategies always one weapon of violence out of date. However, the more stories of survival we hear, the more correlations between the methods used by perpetrators to abuse appear, providing a blueprint to effect change by matching repeat patterns. So the Be the Difference slide just there is how SiSi is working, to create that. So what do survivors identify as priorities for research in the area of domestic sexual and gender-based violence? So for years, survivors have been seeking out support through services, but often saying that when it comes to post-separation abuse and the weaponization of systems, some frontline services just don't get it. The in-camera rule, which maintains a veil of secrecy in the civil, family, and often criminal justice system, has left a gaping chasm, preventing researchers from fully understanding the sacrifice of freedom made by women who flee abuse. So many say, if I knew then what I know now, I would have made very different decisions. Dealing with authoritative state agencies does re-traumatize victims without fail. Limiting this trauma through crisis management was the traditional response. What survivors are calling out for is information, tips and tricks to surviving the process less scathed. Sorry, next.
Yeah, so the Quell course of control means that one. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a quote there from Professor Evan Stark. And really what it's getting at is we need to ask women who experienced abuse what happened to them and what they want us to do about it.
Mm-hmm.
So we go on to the next slide. And this is the transformative space. Grassroots movements have always been about heart, touching hearts and changing minds. Stories from the heart are powerful beyond the words used to tell them. Our stories have the power to bring evidence-based research to life with nuance, conveying meaning and purpose. To put it simply, survivors join the dots. So our next slide is really just looking at the methods that we used. SiSi gathered survivors with lived experiences of surviving various forms of intimate partner abuse with a clearly defined history of engagement with various systems. The individuals that took part are members of SiSi's network and have strong supports, some training and education in the area of domestic sexual and gender-based violence, and all around mighty women with diverse backgrounds from across Ireland. For this particular focus group, 5 participants, from respondents to invitations to take part, met through Zoom. The background to the Engage Research Project was provided, and individuals were given time to digest what was proposed and to give consent to taking part in a virtual meeting that was recorded and transcripts anonymised. Permission was again sought on the day of the focus groups, and with consensus, we recorded our meeting and really tried to keep it to in and around an hour. We met in a group and there was a conversational style forum, worked well. And there were 4 questions that directed our discussion. So the next slide is really kind of the revealing the themes that came through. The starting point is that most abusers are men, and most victims are women or children. And this overwhelming reality must direct the focus of research. Survivor narratives change over time. So therefore documenting these transformations along a trajectory of milestones is a formative exercise, providing valuable information about the longevity of abuse dynamics and the prolonged impact. Obviously, the in-camera rule operating in family law proceedings silences women from articulating their experience of the courtroom. A gendered analysis of courtroom dialogue and the application of law and legislation in tandem with accurate data collection is essential, it was felt, to generate transformed outcomes. by applying research findings to policy and practice. And just to, to point out what happens in secret spaces is actually the most important information to gather. So the next slide. Why survivor-led and survivor-informed? And what does it mean? It means looking at key areas and measuring the impact of abuse at milestones on the survivor journey. Thought to be essential as perspective changes over time. Somebody's needs at separation are very different to needs while surviving, contact through court-ordered access, or the financial impacts from maintenance arrangements or asset division. And then again, there's an upheaval when divorce is a feature. Parenting children with the experience of domestic abuse and sexual abuse, and engaging parents, to reveal their journeys and their children's journeys into adulthood. Questions were raised like, do Irish women endure more abuse due to cultural constraints? And does this lead to long-term abuse, but less femicide per capita than neighbouring nations? So how do we get accurate information from women who are not physically abused? Do we use opportunities like the census form to reach in? Do we generate surveys to gather empirical data to combine with the revelation of qualitative data collection?
Just 1 more minute, 1 to 2 more minutes, Mary-Louise.
Okay. So policies next, A New Hope, policies supposed to protect vulnerable adults and children are in effect being used to commit acts of violence against women and children by the state. Women are afraid to seek support because of how our constitution works in practice. This prevents survivors seeking healthcare or being free to put down the burden of abuse they are currently forced to carry. The main thrust of the focus group's discussion was that survivor perspective and expertise informed and influenced by survivors is much needed in Ireland to uncover the extent and impact of gender-based violence in Ireland, and that research should inform the third national strategy and feed into the 4 pillars of the Istanbul Convention. And this is an international engaged research project that SiSi, used this style with as well. A study on parental alienation and domestic violence has brought lived experience into the room with academics, professionals in the domestic, sexual and gender-based violence sector, and legal practitioners. And while it's ongoing, initial questionnaire results reveal common worldwide themes through sharing interpretations of language. The results were then used to tailor future questionnaires with the aim of capturing authentic experiences while allowing terms that maximize the accuracy of responses. And the next one is family court reform. Taking on participants' consistent and strong recommendations, the need for longitudinal studies was repeatedly highlighted to gather survivor voice and facilitate the data collection and analysis by survivors in areas currently off limits. The need to fill gaps was reflected by all participants that gave so generously of their time to share memories of being let down with catastrophic impact by current responses to victims of domestic, sexual and gender-based violence in Ireland via the family courts. Culturally, there is a distance to travel before the framing of women's empowerment actually gives women the power to move on from abuse. So in conclusion, Ireland has ratified the Istanbul Convention. Ireland has a seat on the UN Security Council and a newly appointed member to Grevio. We're represented with strong female leadership in the European Parliament and fierce women's organisations in the community at local level and across the island. And coercive control is now recognised as a crime. Yet key issues like women's healthcare, addiction services, protective interventions for victims and the voice of the child are all lacking at a political, policy and meaningful implementation level. So it was found that long-term engagement with survivors is essential to maximise the impact of new policy implementation. Ongoing engagement should spotlight and fill the empty space between what has been agreed to address domestic, sexual, gender-based violence and the distance actually covered. Engaged research generates cohesive priorities, creating an accurate roadmap of what needs to happen next to meet commitments, improve outcomes, and uphold human rights in earnest. In short, creating change that lasts. Thanks. I'm sorry if I went over time a bit.
Brilliant. I think we managed well because we started 3 or 4 minutes late. So I think overall we're doing good. So thanks, Mary-Louise, for that. And I really, really love, especially the longitudinal element of your research in the sense of how people's narratives change over time. So I think that that's so important that that is being held and captured. So that's fantastic. So thank you to all our presenters. And we have about, I'm not sure if we're going to be fully just kicked out at 11:30 on the button, but we have definitely 5 minutes anyway, or maybe a couple of more for any questions. So if anyone wants to enter any questions into the chat, now is the time to do it. Or if you want to try and risk seeing if you can turn on your mic or your camera, just once you're aware that it will be recorded. Okay, so far we just have some complimentary comments for people in the chat. Is there anything anyone would like to ask? Don't be shy. So again, people really complimenting the passion in the work.
I suppose maybe I might kick something off by asking the presenters or anybody that wants to, what they feel might be risks in engaging with victims of domestic abuse for themselves when they're doing their research. How do they feel about that, maybe?
I'm happy to kick that off. I work with survivors of child sexual abuse, as you know, and so it's not the same arena as somebody who's in or who has just left a violent relationship. But I suppose that I have to be aware still that I'm not Teflon, and that there are still, okay, here's a very clear example actually of how it can affect. I've been writing and speaking and talking about my experiences as a survivor for over 10 years, and I've been steeped in the arena for a long time academically as well. And I found very interestingly, and I'm sure a lot of us here have read Bessel van der Kolk's The Body Keeps the Score. So what I'm about to say will not come as a surprise to you, but still in all, it surprised me a little bit when I was writing up my PhD. My body reacted to what I was dealing with in terms of I suffer from very dramatic migraines, but not very often. However, during the 3 months that I was writing up, 4 months that I was writing up, I had migraines at least once a week, to the extent that my supervisors were saying, please go and see a doctor, we're not liking this. And I was like, no, it's fine. And I have my drugs and my drugs are great. And what was also very interesting for me, and annoying for me as a student, but very interesting for me as the researcher come academic, was that there were some days where I'd worked, or been working on or working through a transcript or an interview that had many areas of overlap with my own experiences, and come not even late at night, so I couldn't say my eyes were particularly tired, but maybe at about 6 or 7 in the evening, my right eye particularly would just start to stream, and it was like it would sting, and I wouldn't be able to keep it open, so I wouldn't be able to work. And it was my body's way of saying, enough now, Larkin, turn it off. And what was interesting was I would turn off the laptop and go inside to the house. I'm pointing because my office is in the garden, so I'm going back into the house that way. And I could happily turn on Netflix and my eye would be fine. Or I could happily pick up a book that was not related to my work, that was, Jane Eyre or some old Potboiler or whatever, and my eye would be fine. But it was, and I found that very interesting, that there was a physical toll on my body. And just some days you just think, to be very honest, and I'm pretty sure that I won't be judged for saying this, because I'm sure it's happened to all of us in our research at some stage, but there's once or twice when I was in the middle of an interview just thinking, how on earth can we, like, this problem is bigger than we are. How on earth do we keep going? It just feels like the mountain is just way too big. And it might be only for 10 seconds that you have that feeling of overwhelm. But I think it was important to acknowledge it. And again, to bring that to my supervisor, because again, after every interview that I did for my PhD, I saw her within 48 hours to just, deballast and to express to her if something had particularly affected me. So that was, yeah, they were the things that I hadn't thought that I would need to protect myself from, and I was very surprised then when they came up. But again, I'm working in a slightly I'm not working with survivors of domestic violence. It's sexual violence, but of course there's always overlap as well. I mean, we know that.
Yeah, absolutely there is, and thank you for that, Hazel. I think it was all very relevant. I'm sure it speaks to a lot of people. I'm just conscious we do have a question in the chat from Ruth Miller there, and it's directed for Mary-Louise. I'm not sure if you had a chance to see that, Mary-Louise, but she's asking, is there anything you would recommend to frontline domestic violence, gender-based violence services around engaging service users for feedback and service level input?
Thanks, Emma. I was starting to reply with type. I'll probably be faster answering verbally. Yeah, just like services are doing absolutely amazing, incredible work. And I have needed services every step of the journey. So I think the bit that I could make a difference, and certainly made a difference for me, is being afforded the opportunity to actually take part. So an example was I was asked to join the board of West Cork Women Against Violence, and I was there for 4 years, and I learned so much along the way. I think creating those opportunities. Traditionally, we look at victims of domestic, sexual, and gender-based violence, and a little bit like touching on what Stephanie said in her opening address, where we are almost scared to re-traumatize people. So if people reach out, then we are happy to work together. But if not, it's, well, they'll come back. And sometimes it is about that thing of that innate understanding that happens when survivors are brought together. And sometimes it can be that life is just one set of hurdles after another, and an invitation to participate can make all the difference. So I guess what I'm trying to say, it's a combination of fostering the strengths that individuals have, bringing them to work collectively together in a shared space, and allowing kind of that natural energy that happens between survivors to lead it, as opposed to try and apply a framework on top of it, if that makes sense. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thanks, Mary-Louise. So I've just been informed we have 1.5 minutes. So there's 2 questions there towards Celine. You might be able to answer them together. Just asking, now the screen is popping, 2 seconds. Do all students and staff do the courses at once off, or do they repeat it? Okay. And then kind of looking at whether you're extending to primary school.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So at the moment, it's not mandatory to complete the program. However, the new HEA framework, it will be mandatory for all incoming first years to do a shorter orientation where we'll have a bit on bystander and a bit on consent, and then we're signposting them to the full bystander program. There are some schools that have embedded bystanders mandatory in their masters, and the idea is that, we're trying to get this community effort here. There is a good buy-in from staff, particularly over the last few months, and it is envisaged that schools will make it mandatory. Certain schools will make it mandatory to do the bystander program. With regards to primary, I guess early intervention is the key thing. We're running the pilot with secondary schools. The hope is that we'll take the research back to the Department of Education, and hopefully the program would be available to all second levels. Primary, I wholeheartedly agree, but I don't see that